Are you an avid reader of the news, but often wonder how to dispel truth from myth? Well, if so, stay tuned to this week's episode of the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. And welcome to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton, here with my good friend and co-host, Sarah Samuels. And today we're going to focus on two articles that just came out within the last week, telling you things that you absolutely shouldn't do, whether you're pre-retired or whether you're retired, but why most of the things they highlight in those articles really don't matter at all if you've made that also important shift we talk about, going from a more total return mindset to a more income-based mindset. So Sarah, great chance to talk about our favorite topic, and also why that favorite topic is also is something that protects people from all these things that a lot of reporters, a lot of financial advisors say you should never ever do, but you can do them if you're invested and positioned the right way.
And that's why we spend so much time educating everyone on the show this week. And thank you, of course, to all of our listeners out there and even our YouTube viewers out there who are tuning in to the show. So I'm excited to talk about these articles, Dave, because I love whenever we can dispel these myths that the media and the other financial advisors out there are trying to tell people, and we can really explain why income is different. But first of all, did you have a nice weekend? I know you just got back from Connecticut recently. We missed you around the office.
That's awesome. Yeah, it was wonderful. The weather in the Northeast, Sarah, was absolutely perfect. And I got to spend some time on the best type of boat known to man. You know what that is?
Oh, yeah. What kind of boat?
That's friends' boats. That's the best type of boat.
Someone else's boat.
That's right. The one you don't have to pay for. It's a friend's boat. And got to spend one of my best friends all day Friday with him, Friday night, leaving Saturday morning. It was just good for the two of us to catch up. Weather was beautiful. Great experience. How about you?
Well, I was not on a boat this weekend, unfortunately, but I had a nice weekend too, just kicking back and relaxing, you know. And I wonder, Dave, if some of our viewers out there are actually a little worried. Maybe they're a little stressed out this weekend actually, because of this news that we've heard from Moody's downgrading a few more banks. I think people are starting to think about a few months ago, I believe it was March, when some other
it was
Silicon Valley Bank and then the other regional banks were having some issues as well. So let's talk about that first before we talk about these this other articles about retirement and preparing for retirement.
Sure. Well, great question. I guess we if we missed that, it would be a giant void in the show. And you know, I guess it started in large part with the U.S. government bond rating going from AAA to AA. Now, we had one rating agency do this back over a decade ago, and now it just happened with the second rating agency. So it went from the highest rating to the second highest rating, which of course caused interest rates to click up on virtually everything. Even U.S. government debt. And as a result, when interest rates click up, it's bad for the banks. You know, we've talked about that in the past. And that was the first thing. And then, of course, you know, a lot of the rating agencies then said, well, wait a minute. If these banks are backed by the FDIC, which is basically, you know, a governmental agency, it's independent, but it's really, you know, we all know that the FDIC can't bail out more than a couple banks at a time. And if they're a big bank, they can't even bail out a big bank. So we're really counting on the full faith and credit of the U.S. government to back up the FDIC. So if the government bonds have now been downgraded, well, then shouldn't the banks be downgraded? And I think that was basically the mindset that caused these downgrades.
Yep. And I think it's always scary for the average person out there when they hear this sort of news. And of course, the media likes to run with it and get people all spooked about it. But a lot of this, of course, is due to what's gone on with the Federal Reserve and with the recent interest rates, which actually has to do with our first Ask Dave question. So let's get into that question. Now, we have Cleo from North Dakota. She says, Dave, I know the Fed met a few weeks ago, and they said that they're not going to be raising rates anymore. So why are people saying that rates are going up?
Well, Cleo, great question. I think there's a couple components. One is what we just talked about, that in theory, if the default risk of a U.S. government bond is a little bit higher, then rates should go up. Although I don't think that's the biggest part of it, Cleo, because the reality is that for years now, we've had higher yields on our bonds than a lot of other countries that have lower bond ratings by the very same rating agency. So there have been periods of time where countries like Italy has a much lower rating, might pay slightly more interest, whereas countries like Spain that might have a lower rating pay less interest. So across borders, it hasn't really been a thing. So I don't think this downgrade has had a big effect on interest rates. But Cleo, what really happened was the fact that the markets are starting to realize now that if, inflation is coming down, it's more likely we're going to have a soft landing, i.e. the Fed's not going to create a recession, which seems to be the common narrative in the news today and by a lot of financial analysts. Then, if that's the case, then the Fed is not going to have a reason to jam short-term interest rates back down again. They're not going to lower short-term interest rates right away. So when you see a 2-year government bond and certainly a federal funds rate, which is a basically really short-term rate, those interest rates are higher than a 10-year bond, then that only makes sense if the short-term rates are higher than long-term rates if you think that short-term rates are coming back down again. Well, if the government isn't going to lower the short-term rates, then guess what has to happen? Long-term rates have to come up. So you're right, Cleo, the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve, did not raise short-term rates anymore. In fact, they said that they might be slightly less inclined to do so in light of the news. But long-term rates came up by market forces to make this adjustment. Because if the Fed's not going to have to lower interest rates in the next year or two to save an ailing economy, then long-term interest rates have to come up. And that's why we've seen over the last several weeks the yield on the 10-year government bond, Sarah, actually went up by about 0.5%.
Yeah. Well, Cleo, thank you so much for sending in your question. And if any of our listeners, our viewers out there have a question that you would like Dave to answer, perhaps on a future show, all you have to do is send us an email at askdave@retirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. And thanks for spending your weekend here with us on the Retirement Income Source, where it is all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels, and I'm here with David Scranton. And today's show is all about dispelling some of these media myths after we've seen a few recent articles come out that are saying, oh, you shouldn't do this in retirement, or you can't do this while you're preparing for retirement. So those things I think are really troublesome for people. And then they hear news like the bank failure, or the bank being downgraded. And I think people start to get stressed and they start to worry. So just going back to the bank state before we move on, do you think people should be worried, or is it nothing to worry about?
I think you need to keep an eye on it a little bit. I wouldn't say worry yet. But, I was thinking when you're talking about that, when you hear always and never, I would say that if you hear always and never, you should probably never listen to that piece of advice, because there's no one size fits all. There's no always or never, right? If something were all good, everyone would have it or would embark upon that strategy. If it were all bad, nobody would. It couldn't exist. Regarding the banks, though, keep an eye on it, because there's two things now that are affecting the banks. One is this net interest margin. They're lending money out or they have lent money out in the past at lower rates. Some of those loans they still have on their portfolio. So they're getting interest at a certain interest rate, a lower rate, and then all of a sudden they have to pay it out to CD holders at a higher rate, because CD holders today want to get 5%. So if you're bringing in 4 or even 5, but you have expenses and you're paying out 5, your net interest margin is negative. You're underwater. Now, it's great on new mortgages. The new mortgage rate just hit 8%. And that's the highest we've seen in a long time for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. But, new money, that's great, but still they're holding on to a lot of that old debt. So that becomes a problem with some of the banks, and their net interest margin, a lot of them has gone negative. They're losing money on a cash flow basis. The second thing, Sarah, is that you have to worry about their balance sheet, right? When interest rates go up, the value of a lot of the loans, just like bonds on their balance sheet, goes down. And they have to account for that on a market value basis. They can't account for it on a face value or maturity. So therefore, their reserves go down, and they can't lend out as much, or they're weaker. At least the rating agencies look at them as being weaker. So this is what's happening. Hopefully the Fed won't raise rates, and hopefully long-term rates won't go up that much more. But coming up, we're going to get back to our topic of the day, which is why, when you hear articles about never do this or never do that, why 90% of the time, my opinion, if you invest for the I, income first, if you're retired or close to retirement, why all those rules go away and you can relax and have an enjoyable, fulfilled retirement. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
Welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with the host David Scranton, and today's show is all about dispelling these common media myths, these articles out there saying these are the things you should never do, or these are the things you can only do in retirement. We're going to be explaining to you today, all throughout the show, why you can do those things, especially if you're invested in the income strategy. So, Dave, let's get right into it. Now, this first one, this article actually covers the 7 things that you should not do while you're preparing for retirement. So this is
10 years or so leading up to retirement.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Sort of the red zone for the NFL, the football terminology, right?
That's right.
That 5 to 10 year time before. So let's look at this list. The first thing here, I think this is an easy one for you, Dave. I think you'll agree with this. It says you should not withdraw from your retirement fund.
Yeah. So again, never say always, never say never. But this is about as close to a never as you might get, that it doesn't make sense to withdraw from your retirement fund before you retire. In large part because you have less money when you retire, but also because now you're paying taxes on all your income plus your retirement fund and so on.
Yeah.
Now you could take a loan against it, but even taking a loan against it has problems because you take a loan against it and now the money's not invested in the investment. So it may sound good that, hey, I'm paying interest to myself, but if your funds go up by 20%, you're not in there. So only in case of financial emergency, let's say you get laid off and you're in the 0% tax bracket, then maybe, just maybe, but for the most of the time, I agree with you, Sarah. That's probably as close to a never as you're going to get.
Yep. All right, let's look at the next one. You should never move out of state. What do you think about that, Dave? Well, let me give you the reasoning first, and I'll explain. And I think that this could go either way, right? Because the reasoning for the article, the explanation behind it is that if you move to a state that does have an income tax or a higher income tax, that it could be problematic when it comes to your taxes. If you earn a lot that year, you may end up paying more in taxes in your new state. But this all depends on where you choose to move. And if you move to a state like Florida, for example, with no state income tax, then this might not be a problem.
Well, that's true. And it also assumes that you're going to have less income in retirement. So it assumes you make the move after you're retired because you'll have less income. Well, to me, if your financial advisor is doing a good job, or if you're doing a good job for yourself, you shouldn't have to take a pay cut when you retire. And the key to that is going from a total return focus you've had during all your accumulation years, where you just want to get total return irrespective of whether it comes from growth or income, to now having an income first strategy. So if you plan right in that red zone, then you don't have to worry about having less income when you retire.
Yep.
And therefore, doing it and getting ahead of it makes sense, providing, of course, you have a job that allows you to work remotely. And that's a big if. But if you do, I don't see a reason not to. In fact, I'd go as far as to say, if you're going to take a mortgage on the property, you actually do want to do it while you're working, because it's harder to get a mortgage when you're retired.
Yeah. Well, that's funny, Dave. That actually is our next Ask Dave question. And paying off your mortgage is actually one of those things that the media is saying you shouldn't do until after you retire. So our Ask Dave question comes from Bart out in North Carolina. And Bart says, should I pay off my mortgage before I retire? We know what the media would say, no, not a good idea. But Dave, let's hear what Dave says.
Well, Bart, the traditional thinking is, well, you need the tax deduction while you're working, so keep that mortgage intact, pay off all your other debt, but keep that intact. And I get that mindset, but there's a couple things that those folks aren't considering. And by the way, I also know that now it's a bigger mindset, because if you have a 4% mortgage, that looks like a pretty good deal right now, when the new mortgage rate, as we mentioned in the last segment, just went up to 8% on a 30-year fixed mortgage as of last week. But first of all, the tax deduction. Well, if you have a 4% mortgage and you take money out of a bank that's paying a 4% CD to pay it off, the thought is, well, okay, I get a deduction on my mortgage. It's only costing me 2.5%. Well, that's fine, but guess what? Of your bank CD money, you only kept 2.5% of it, because you got 4 after you paying the tax, you got 2.5, right? So the taxes become a wash because you're not using IRA money, at least hopefully not to do this. You're using regular taxable investments. So now you might say to me, Bart, well, I can get more than 5% in a CD. I can more than 4%. I can get 5% right now. My mortgage is at 3.5 or 4. Why would I want to pay it off? Well, simple. You have to pay principal and interest on your mortgage payment. So it's not just a question of whether that interest is greater than the interest you're paying on the mortgage. It's a question of, is that interest greater than the payment in total you're paying on the mortgage, principal and interest? And even at today's higher interest rates, most of the time the answer to that question is no. And if that's the fact, then it makes sense to take the money out, pay off the mortgage, and what you've done is you've freed up some cash flow. Cash flow that can be used to invest, to dollar cost average, to do all the things that you've been taught through your entire accumulation years. So it's not just about the taxes. It's not just about the interest rate. And if you're comparing apples to oranges and you're in the red zone, Bart, and you're trying to say, well, I can get more in the stock market, I should average 10, 11% over the long run. Well, now you probably should consider paying it off, because now you're, a dollar paid off in a mortgage is like a dollar in a bank CD. You know what you're going to get because you save that interest. Whereas in the red zone, the stock market, who knows what it's going to do over the next 5 or 10 years.
Well, thank you, Bart, so much for sending in your Ask Dave email. And if any of our listeners out there have a question that you want Dave to answer, or a topic you'd like Dave to even cover on a show, all you have to do is send us an email at askdave@Retirement Income Source. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels, here with the host, David Scranton, and today's show is all about the different myths out there that the media likes to promote, and a lot of those everyday financial advisors like to promote these ideas as well, but they're very generic. Of course, they're not meant for every single person's situation, but Dave and I saw these articles recently that we wanted to talk about a little bit on the show. So the article we've been talking about is about all the things that you shouldn't do leading up to retirement. So we covered why they're saying you shouldn't move out of state, why you shouldn't pay off your mortgage. Dave actually agrees with the point of why you shouldn't withdraw from your retirement fund leading up to retirement. And this next one, Dave, it's saying why you shouldn't sell your home, which kind of goes hand in hand with paying off your mortgage.
Well, the reality is you want to buy low and sell high, right? If you're downsizing. If you're upsizing, you want to sell when prices are down. So if you live in an area where prices are suppressed, but you want a nicer home in retirement, or maybe a second home, okay, then maybe it's okay to sell because you're upgrading. You sell low at a certain dollar amount, but you buy low at a bigger dollar amount. If you're looking to downsize in retirement, then you want to sell when things are strong. Like right now in Connecticut, Sarah, we have a pretty strong market. So my neighbor just sold his house because he's downsizing, and in spite of interest rates, the prices are still strong. So it's really, again, no nevers or always. It's really a question of whether you're downsizing or upsizing, or whether you're in a market where everything's soft or everything's strong in terms of price level.
Yep. Well, the next item on this list kind of goes hand in hand with that, Dave, because it's number 5. You should never make a major purchase leading up to retirement. Do you agree with that?
I completely disagree, actually, because that's the time now to digest that purchase. If you wait till you're retired, then all that money comes out of your retirement funds. If it's 401ks or IRAs, you have to pay tax on it to make the major purchase. So if you're like a lot of people that are lopsided toward IRA money and 401k money, then you want to make that purchase before you retire, even if you have to take a loan and pay it off in installments, because once you're retired, you may be forced to take it all out of these taxable accounts, and that's going to be painful. So get those things purchased and bought before you retire. So now when you retire, your monthly expense, your minimum monthly expenses are low, and you could spend more of that discretionary income in retirement on things that are fun, things that you want to do to enjoy your retirement, because now you're not spending 8 to 10 hours a day working.
Right, and you need to fill that time with hopefully something productive. But I think this is why it's so important, Dave, to work with an income specialist as you're leading up to retirement, because these are the sort of things you cover when you meet with people to discuss their goals, their needs, and their wants. And if people want to make a major purchase, that's something they can plan for before they retire.
Yeah, that's 100%. That's right. And so I think it's better to do that before. And if the major purchase is a home, for example, and you're buying in an area that's suppressed right now because interest rates have gone up, great timing. So it's all about finding the right time to buy in finding the right time to sell as it is with anything.
Yep. And the few last things on here, you should not start a business. It will consume too many resources, and you should not quit your job early. So we've talked about all the things that the media is saying, hey, you can't do this leading up to retirement. But what about after you retire? Well, we're going to ask Dave if he agrees with our next article about all the things baby boomers should never do in retirement. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and you're listening to The Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. Thanks for listening to The Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and today's show has been all about dispelling the different media myths out there when it comes to the things that you always should do or the things you never should do when you're coming into retirement, when you're preparing for retirement. So far we've talked about this 7 different things you shouldn't do while you're preparing for retirement, things like moving out of state, selling your home, paying off your mortgage, making a major purchase. And the 5th thing Dave actually agreed with, and this is you should not withdraw from your retirement fund. So Dave, let's finish up this list. Now, the next thing is you should not start your business while you're preparing for retirement. What do you think?
Well, I actually completely disagree, because if you do plan to have a business in retirement, and some people do it because they want, in which case I guess doesn't matter. But some people want to have a business in retirement because they want an extra income source. Maybe that's their play money. And if that's the case, it takes a while. When you start a new business, Sarah, as you know, that it takes a while to get things up and running, and you need to support that business and its expenses up front. And sometimes the best way to do that is when you have a full-time salary coming in the door, so that you don't expect to have a business that's profitable in retirement. You get to experiment while you're working and determine whether or not it's actually going to work. And if it is, make it profitable before you retire.
Well, that was one of the concerns, is that a new business can take up too many resources while you're heading into retirement. The final thing on the list, Dave, thing you should not do while you're preparing for retirement is quit your job early. Good advice?
It depends. It depends. Yeah. So I think we're going to be 5.5 of 7 that I disagree with, maybe 1.5 of 7 that I actually agree with. Of course, agree with not taking the IRA 401k withdrawals while you're working. But you shouldn't quit your job. Well, it really depends. If you have another position lined up, that's fine. Or if you have a business that you've already started to run on the side, and that's your passion, and you've proven that this business model can work and be profitable, then why not? It's really a function of how much you've saved for retirement. So if you were 5 or 10 years before retirement and you haven't saved enough, then you probably don't want to take a pay cut unless the side business you're getting in is really profitable or the new opportunity is really profitable. But if you have saved a lot for retirement and you think you're okay, and you just need to make enough money to get by, but you don't have to save or invest any additional money in the last years leading up to retirement, then I think it's okay to do. So again, that's a 50-50 one.
Yep. So we've talked about the things that the media says you should never do leading up to retirement, but what about when you're already retired? Well, according to this recent article that came out just this week, Dave, you should not buy non-essential items unless you can buy them with cash, which leads to our Ask Dave question, actually, because this is a pretty good question. I think it depends on your definition of essential or non-essential. But we have Andrew from Georgia. He says, I just retired, but I need to buy a car. Should I pay with cash, or would it be okay to finance it?
Andrew, great question. And you're right, Sarah, that is that essential or is it non-essential? Well, it depends. If it's a fun car that you want to buy, second vehicle, it's non-essential. If the car you have is about to crap out, can I say crap out on the radio?
I think that's allowed.
Think so? Okay.
Skin of your teeth.
All right, I think it's too late anyway. So yeah, Andrew, if that's about to happen, then you need it. It's essential. But regardless, what it really comes down to is, are you funding it from the interest and dividends from your investments, or are you taking it out of principal? See, that's more important. If you're taking it out of principal, then next year you're going to generate less income, and that could be a problem. But if you're generating enough interest and dividends to pay for it, that's great. And there are times when you might want to finance it. For example, if you're lopsided toward IRA money and 401k money, you buy a $40,000, $50,000 car, you take that much of a lump sum withdrawal from your 401k or IRA, you have to pay tax on it. So you have to take out about $75,000 in most cases, $75 to get $50,000 net to buy the vehicle. the price of your car just went up. So if you're lopsided toward IRA and 401k money, you might be forced to finance it so you could take installments out over time and pay it over time. And I don't like that. I don't like having the debt, but there are times when you should do it. So again, that's why I say, never say never or always. That's one big instance where you want to do that. But again, if you focus on the I, you focus on income first, growth second mentality. Again, starting about 10 years leading up to retirement, the most important thing, Andrew, is that you are getting this from the income. And you should be saving in advance, ideally. So even if you have to take a loan for this car, go ahead and take it, but then take enough withdrawals for the next car so that now you have enough cash outside of IRAs or 401ks by taking periodic withdrawals and spreading out the tax so that now you can pay for that next car in cash. So if you didn't plan to buy this car in cash, make sure you plan for the next one.
And Andrew, I hope that helps. Thank you so much for sending in your Ask Dave question. And if anyone of our listeners out there has a question that you want Dave to answer, perhaps even on a future show, all you have to do is send us an email at askdave@retirementincomesource. That's SOURCE.com. And thank you for spending your weekend here with us on the Retirement Income Source, where it is all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels. I'm here with David Scranton. And today we've been talking about some recent media articles that are giving these helpful lists of things you should never do leading up to retirement, things you should never do while you're already retired. And of course, Dave, I'm using the word helpful. I'm being a little facetious here because we know whenever you make those never statements or always statements, it's you're asking for trouble there.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing on the list we already covered, which was you only pay cash for any non-essential items. Mm-hmm. And you talked about why that could go in really either direction. Of course, it all depends on the person. But the next thing on this list is overpriced vacations, things you should never do when you're already retired.
And you see, this is where I get a little crazy, Sarah, because the reality of it is they're assuming that you're going to get a pay cut, a reduction in income in retirement. Well, if you plan in advance and you make that also important transition in that red zone, those 10 years leading up to retirement, then it's no longer an issue because what you've done is you've planned to get the same or more income in retirement. And if you've done that and you've kind of sort of locked it in that red zone, then you should be able to take fancier vacations when you've retired. Yeah. That's your reward, right? So I completely disagree. I think you can spend money on fun stuff as long as you've planned in advance for it. I hate this scarcity thinking that I'm going to retire, have 10 more hours each day of time on my hands, but I'm going to sit home and because I can't afford to do anything else. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yep. And these next two items on the list, Dave, are things that I don't think you have to worry about when you invest for income. And that's you should never give extravagant gifts if you're retired. And you should also not do any home renovations if you're retired. But like you said, Dave, when you invest for income, you can actually, that's where that money can come from to pay for those things. You can plan for it and you can make sure you're covered so you don't have to dip into your budget or your emergency savings for those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sarah, gifts, again, this is another thing like extravagant vacations that, we can't afford this because we're living on a reduced income in retirement, so grandma and grandpa can't give good gifts anymore. Well, yeah, if you're on a reduced income and things are tight, then absolutely. But if you've planned in advance and you've made that transition during the red zone from being total return focused to being income first, growth second focused, then if you have enough income coming in, you should be able to continue to make nice gifts. In fact, a lot of my clients actually spend more money in retirement on gifts, charitable gifts and things, to good causes.
Yeah.
Renovations, same thing. Yeah. If you need $20,000 of income from your investments to complement Social Security and pensions, but you have $1 million, that $1 million invested for the I for income can give you $50,000 a year. Now you have an extra $30,000 a year to work with. So after you save that up for 3 years, now you've got nearly $100,000 to do a renovation. You don't have to take it from a home equity line of credit. You literally have enough money to pay cash for that renovation.
Yep. Another item on this list, Dave, is timeshares. But again, if your goal in retirement, if your want is you want a timeshare, you want to travel more, you want to go to your timeshare, that's something that an income specialist can build into your strategy so you don't have to worry about it and you don't have to listen to this list that says you can't have that in retirement.
Yeah. So timeshares are another thing that, they're not good economically, so I understand why people would say they poo-poo timeshares. But the reality of it is, if you want to know that you can go to a certain place that you love every year, and a certain month is a good time, and you want to go there, and you're willing to spend a little bit extra for that guarantee, then why not do it, right? Again, if you plan to have enough income in retirement, you're not taking a pay cut, then I see no reason that that is a problem. But if you're tight on cash in retirement, then you're right. It's probably not the most cost-effective way to take a vacation.
Yep. Well, so far, Dave, we've talked about how this recent article says you can never take an overpriced vacation or an expensive vacation in retirement, why you shouldn't give extravagant gifts, why you shouldn't renovate your home. So we're going to wrap up this article of all the things you shouldn't do. And then we're going to talk about why investing for income gives you all of those options back and how you can have a lot more opportunity when you do invest for income, why it's the ultimate strategy. I'm Sarah Samuels here with David Scranton, and you're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.
And welcome back to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm David Scranton here with Sarah Samuels. And today we spent a lot of time debunking a lot of the myths about retirement planning. First, debunking some of the myths of all the things maybe you shouldn't do leading up to retirement, and then all the things you supposedly shouldn't do during retirement. But almost all of those, I would say out of 15 items, Sarah, 12 and a half of those were debunked, providing that you go from a total return focus, irrespective of whether it comes from growth or income, to an income first, growth second focus, and hopefully do that leading up to retirement.
And I think it shows, Dave, just how different what you do and this program is from all the other media sources out there. And really the goal here is to educate people. And it's funny because the only things that you agreed with from the articles leading up to retirement, while you're preparing for retirement, Dave agreed you should not withdraw from your retirement fund barring any emergencies. And then the other thing, Dave, that you sort of agreed with, depending, of course, is only paying for non-essential items using cash. But again, it all depends on the situation. So really, the beautiful thing about income, Dave, is when you invest for income, it really removes the governor. It kind of takes the handcuffs, takes the handcuffs off all of the traditional thinking that a lot of people have when it comes to finance, because it's really a renewable resource.
It is. And see, that's the thing. You know, if you go home and you say to your spouse, look, I want to redo the kitchen, and it's going to cost $100,000. Right now, all of a sudden, if you've got to take that $100,000 out of principal, that's principal that won't be there in the future if you need home health care or for a legacy for your family when you're gone. And frankly, now you'll get interest income. You'll get income on $100,000 less, right? So it affects your income forever, and it affects your legacy and your ability to self-insure against medical expenses in the future and all the what ifs. But if you take it from income, it's a much easier conversation, because now you're just taking, maybe in my example in the previous block, just, 3 years worth of income. You've now accumulated, you haven't spent it, and now you're going to go and upgrade that kitchen in cash. Or want to buy a second car as a collector's item, okay? It's one thing if you have to go home and have a conversation about buying it by taking money out of savings. But if you're having a conversation about just taking it from 1 or 2 years worth of interest, you're not touching principal, it's much easier to do. So it's kind of like when you were in school, Sarah, you probably remember, like if you want to skip gym class, right? You had to get a permission slip from your parents or the doctor if you wanted to do that. Right. Well, this is like a permission slip from your spouse. It's a permission slip from your kids. It's a permission slip from your financial advisor to spend the money in retirement, because it's coming from that renewable resource. It's not coming out of the ground from a finite resource, i.e. from your principal.
Yep. Well, a lot of people, of course, do have misconceptions about the concept of investing for income. And I want to get to our Ask Dave question, which I think deals with this. So we have Cameron from Arkansas. He says, I'm afraid if I transition to income too early, then I won't have as much of an inflation hedge.
Well, Cameron, you sound you're younger. You might be preparing for retirement or just newly retired. And of course, you have to deal with inflation. But there's right ways and wrong ways to deal with inflation. And first of all, it's a myth that growth-oriented investments do well in an inflationary period, right? Inflation has been up over the last year and a half or so, and frankly, most growth-oriented investments have gotten hurt. They've come down. Growth-oriented investments actually get hurt worse. Why? Because when there's high periods of inflation, the Fed increases interest rates. And when interest rates are going up, as we saw over the last year and a half, growth-oriented investments tend to drop more than income-oriented investments. So growth-oriented investments have always been a terrible inflation hedge. So what are your alternatives? Well, first, it's important to realize that if you're going for income in the stock market, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get growth as an inflation hedge. In fact, one of the best ways to have an inflation hedge is to get into higher dividend stocks, companies that really are dedicated to maintaining and increasing their dividend. Because that increased dividend from year to year is an inflation hedge for you. And most healthy companies have grown their earnings by 5% per year on average. So therefore, if they're increasing their dividends proportionally, that gives you a nice inflation hedge. And also, over time, hopefully your lump sum value will go up in high dividend equity strategies in order for you to be able to take care of yourself in case you need full-time home health care or if you want to leave a big legacy. The other way to do it, even if you're in bonds and bond-like instruments and you're getting, let's say right now, you can get maybe a 6% income stream. Well, if you don't need all that income, but you're conservative, you don't want to be in the stock market, you could still reinvest some of those interest and dividends to grow your income the old-fashioned way. So the reinvestment of interest and dividends to grow that future income. So yes, you can still have a really good inflation hedge, maybe a better one, by going to an income-first, growth-second mindset.
Cameron, thank you for sending in your question. And if any of our listeners out there have a retirement question or something that you want to ask Dave, all you have to do is send us an email to askdave@Retirement Income Source. That's SOURCE.com. You're listening to the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income. I'm Sarah Samuels here with Dave Scranton, and today's show has been all about dispelling these media myths. The media and the traditional financial industry, they like to make these rules, right? The things that you should do leading up to retirement, or the things you shouldn't do while you're already retired. And we've talked a lot about why Dave doesn't agree with those things. He only agreed with a few of the points that each of these articles made. But most importantly, income is really the best strategy when it comes to retirement, because it's a renewable resource. And really, Dave, I don't think that it's necessarily too early to transition to income, like Cameron's question. He's wondering if maybe it's just too early, you shouldn't do it. Can you explain why it might be better, in fact, to transition 5 to 10 years away from retirement?
Well, because you don't know what the markets are going to do. And if you're going to go from a growth strategy into an income strategy, it means you have to sell one thing to buy another. And we know that from 2000 to 2013, the market was underwater for 13 years, right? And the fact that it happens once tells us it can what?
It's going to happen again.
It can happen again, right? So do you really want to take the chance? You know, if you're 6 years out, do you want to have to postpone retirement for maybe as many as 7 years because you timed it wrong? So making the transition early is important. And then think about some of these questions leading up to retirement, right? You want to make a major purchase. Well, don't do it until you're retired, right? Well, you can do it if you're doing it from income, if your investments are generating enough income, right? Don't start your business, one article said. Well, if you have enough income coming from investments, maybe it'll give you the freedom now before retirement to go ahead and start that business, okay? Don't move somewhere else. Well, if you have enough income to support a second house, guess what? You know, if the real estate market's down, you might be able to go ahead and buy that second house because you have enough income, and then wait until the market comes back up and sell your house. So even if you're downsizing, right? I said if you're downsizing, Sarah, you know, you want to do it when the prices are high. But, you know, again, what if the price of your house is low? Well, if you have enough income, you go buy that other house now and hold on to your house until prices come back. So income is that permission slip. It just gives you freedom to do whatever you want. And to me, that's what life is all about. It's about choices.
Yeah. And if income really is freedom, Dave, then why aren't financial advisors pushing the income method out there to their clients?
They just don't know how to do it. A lot of advisors today, Sarah, have been trained in the 80s and 90s, the best stock market in U.S. history, and they got addicted to growth, right? Every time they put somebody in a growth-oriented strategy, the client was happy because their account went up. Maybe they gave the advisor more money to invest. Maybe they sent referrals to that advisor. So their paradigm became, you know, growth. And let's face it, you know, our earliest paradigms in life are what shaped us, right? So that's true. And then also that happened again more recently with people that came in. But also, Sarah, I think a lot of the big firms, they feel like they can make more money when they have clients in growth-oriented things. And these aren't even advisors. These are, I think, a lot of advisors that, for lack of a better way to put it, were brainwashed by a lot of the big firms. And the big firms know that, gosh, if they have their clients in a portfolio of laddered government bonds, right, doesn't require any active management, doesn't have any default risk, that they can't charge a lot in terms of fees for these types of things. So therefore, everything they talk about, all the research that they give to their advisors is skewed toward being growth oriented. So part of it is the age. We have an aging population in the financial services world whose paradigm is growth, growth, and more growth. And the other part of it, I think, are financial motivations of a lot of the big financial firms on Wall Street.
Yep. Well, that's why we do this show every week, right, Dave? We are the anti-brainwashing crew, right? We're trying to get the correct message, the truthful message of income, and explain why our listeners maybe aren't hearing it from their current advisor if they're not working with an income specialist, or really why they're not hearing it as the answer touted in the financial media.
And you're right, Sarah. I like to think of our show as the antidote for all the things that our viewers and listeners read in the media and hear from their financial advisors.
And if you enjoyed this episode or you want to listen to past episodes, all you have to do is check out retirementincomesourceradio.com.
And more importantly, please make sure that you're here with us next week. I'm David Scranton, here with Sarah Samuels, and this is the Retirement Income Source, where it's all about the income.